The morning mist clung to the asphalt like a shroud, transforming the rural road into a ghostly tunnel. Through the windshield, the world appeared soft and uncertain, each twist revealing nothing but more gray emptiness ahead. The vehicle's headlights cut weakly through the haze, illuminating patches of tall grass that swayed in the early breeze. Then something appeared that shouldn't have been there. Scattered across the dark asphalt lay chunks of red earth, small stones, and clods of dried mud. The debris formed an irregular pattern, as if someone had dumped wheelbarrows of soil directly onto the road surface. The driver slowed, confusion mounting as more evidence emerged. Deeper gouges in the dirt shoulder parallel trenches that suggested something heavy had been dragged across the landscape. The vehicle rolled to a complete stop. Through the clearing mist, two small figures became visible on the roadside, their gray forms barely distinguishable from the dawn shadows. They moved with desperate mechanical precision, their actions so focused they seemed oblivious to the approaching vehicle or the lightening sky around them. Two young elephants, no larger than ponies, worked frantically at the base of an acacia tree. The larger of the pair, perhaps 3 years old, used its trunk like a primitive shovel, scooping red earth and flinging it behind with rhythmic desperation. Every few seconds it would pause, extend its trunk deep into the growing hole, then resume digging with renewed urgency. Its smaller companion, barely 18 months old, mimicked these actions with clumsy determination, its infant trunk still learning the complex movements required for such work. The hole they had created measured nearly 2 feet deep and twice as wide. Around its edges, the earth lay piled in small mountains, evidence of hours of relentless labor. The soil itself told a story of drought, bone-dry, compacted to concrete hardness, resistant to even the determined efforts of young trunks and feet. Each scoop required multiple attempts, each attempt leaving new scratches along their trunks where the rough earth had scraped away layers of sensitive skin. The older elephant's breathing came in short, labored gasps. Its trunk, normally smooth and flexible, bore dozens of fresh abrasions. Red welts marked where thorny acacia roots had torn through the skin during the night's digging. Despite these injuries, it continued working, pausing only to step aside and allow the younger elephant access to the deepest part of the hole. What struck any observer most powerfully was the systematic nature of their effort. This wasn't random scratching or playful excavation. The older elephant would dig for several minutes, then step back and extend its trunk into the hole, searching for something that never appeared. When it found nothing, it would resume digging with mechanical persistence. The younger elephant watched these movements carefully, learning, copying, hoping. But the hole contained only more dry earth. A survey of the immediate area revealed the full scope of their desperate search. 3 other excavations marked the roadside, each measuring approximately 18 inches deep, each abandoned when no water appeared. The elephants had worked methodically along the road's edge, following some instinctive pattern that should have led them to underground springs or seasonal pools. In normal circumstances, their mother would have guided this search. Adult female elephants carry generational knowledge about water sources passed down through decades of survival in harsh landscapes. They know where underground streams flow closest to the surface, where seasonal rains collect in natural depressions, where morning dew accumulates in sufficient quantities to sustain life. This knowledge represents the difference between life and death during drought seasons. Without this guidance, the young elephants were digging blindly. Their instincts told them to search for water underground, but their inexperience led them to choose locations based on desperation rather than wisdom. The soil beneath the acacia tree appeared softer than the surrounding hardpan, but no underground water source existed there. They had spent an entire night and morning engaged in futile labor. The older elephant's body showed advanced signs of dehydration. Its normally rounded belly appeared sunken skin hanging in loose folds that suggested a weight loss of 15 to 20%. When it turned its head, the movement was slow and deliberate, conserving energy for the essential task of digging. Its eyes, normally bright and alert, had begun to sink into shadowed sockets. The younger elephant displayed even more severe symptoms. Its ears hung motionless against its head, lacking the energy for the constant fanning motion that normally helped regulate body temperature. When it attempted to match its companion's digging pace, its movements became uncoordinated, its tiny trunk occasionally missing the soil entirely as fatigue clouded its judgment. Yet they continued digging. The relationship between the two animals spoke to something beyond simple companionship. When the older elephant found a slightly softer patch of earth, it would dig there briefly, then step aside and guide the younger one to the same spot. When the smaller elephant grew too weak to continue, the older one would nudge it gently away from the hole, encouraging rest while continuing the work alone. Their survival depended entirely on finding water within the next few hours. Adult elephants can survive several days without water, but juveniles of this age require regular hydration to maintain their organ function. The smaller elephant in particular showed signs that critical systems were beginning to shut down. Its trunk movements had become sluggish, and it occasionally swayed while standing, suggesting that its brain was no longer receiving adequate blood flow. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the protective mist. Soon, the full heat of the day would make their situation even more desperate. In direct sunlight, their already stressed bodies would lose precious moisture through respiration and what little remained of their normal cooling behaviors. Still, they dug. The scene represented something profound about elephant social bonds and survival instincts. Even in the face of certain death, the older elephant continued to protect and guide its smaller companion. It had assumed a responsibility it was far too young to carry, yet it carried it with unwavering determination. But determination alone would not save them. The hole they had spent the night creating would never yield water. The soil composition was wrong, the location was wrong, and they were running out of time to find the right place. As the morning shadows shortened, their movements became increasingly labored. The older elephant now paused for longer periods between digging sessions, its trunk hanging limply as it gathered strength for the next attempt. The younger elephant had stopped digging entirely, instead standing motionless beside the hole waiting for something that would never appear. They had perhaps hours left before their bodies could no longer sustain the effort required to search for water. Their last dig was becoming exactly that, their final attempt at survival in a landscape that had become too harsh for two young elephants to navigate alone. The approaching vehicle represented their only remaining hope, though they seemed unaware of its significance. They continued their desperate excavation, two small figures against an enormous sky, carrying the weight of generational knowledge they had never been taught, searching for salvation in all the wrong places. The rescue team arrived as the sun reached its zenith, bringing with it the punishing heat that would transform the elephant's condition from critical to terminal within hours. Dr. Kimani emerged from the lead vehicle, her experienced eyes immediately cataloging the severity of what lay before her. 20 years of wildlife veterinary practice had taught her to assess animal conditions quickly and accurately, but nothing quite prepared her for the systematic desperation she witnessed. The larger elephant stood guard over its companion, who had collapsed beside the futile excavation. Its protective stance spoke to bonds that transcended simple survival, yet its own condition bordered on catastrophic. Dr. Kimani estimated body weight loss at nearly 25%. A level that indicated multiple organ systems were beginning to fail. The initial assessment required a delicate balance between urgent medical intervention and the trauma of human contact. These elephants had likely never encountered humans in positive circumstances. Their flight response, already compromised by severe dehydration, could still trigger a panic that would expend their remaining energy reserves and accelerate their decline toward death. Dr. Kimani's team moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter that allowed the elephants space while preventing their escape into even more dangerous territory. The portable IV station was assembled at a distance, its equipment ready for immediate use once trust could be established. The first challenge involved approaching the animal safely. The larger elephant, despite its weakened condition, positioned itself between the rescue team and its companion. Its trunk rose in warning, a gesture that would normally be accompanied by aggressive posturing. Instead, the movement was slow and unsteady, revealing just how little energy remained for defensive behaviors. Temperature readings confirmed Dr. Kimani's worst fears. Both elephants showed elevated body temperatures that indicated their internal cooling systems had begun to fail. In the direct sunlight, this condition would worsen rapidly. Creating shade became the immediate priority. The team erected a large tarp supported by telescoping poles, casting both elephants into blessed shadow. The older elephant's response was immediate and telling. It moved closer to its companion, using its own body to ensure the smaller elephant received maximum benefit from the shade. Hydration represented a complex medical challenge. Severely dehydrated elephants cannot simply be given water to drink. Their digestive systems, stressed by days without proper hydration, would reject large quantities of liquid. Worse, rapid rehydration could cause dangerous shifts in blood chemistry that might trigger cardiac arrest. The solution required intravenous fluid administration, but placing an IV line in an unrestrained traumatized elephant presents enormous technical difficulties. The team's approach relied on patient's observation and gradual conditioning. Dr. Kamani began by simply sitting near the elephants, allowing them to grow accustomed to human presence. She spoke in low, steady tones, not to communicate specific meaning, but to establish a consistent, non-threatening sound pattern. Her movements remained slow and predictable, never approaching directly, but instead allowing the elephants to choose their level of engagement. The breakthrough came when the larger elephant, driven by desperate thirst, approached the water containers the team had placed within reach. Its first attempts at drinking were tentative, its trunk testing the water's temperature and quality before taking small amounts. Dr. Kimani observed carefully, noting that the elephant's drinking pattern was already compromised. Instead of the deep, sustained draws that characterize normal elephant hydration, it took small, frequent sips that suggested internal awareness of its digestive limitations. Encouraging this behavior required patience and strategic positioning. The team placed multiple water sources around the shaded area, allowing the elephant to move between them without feeling cornered. Each successful interaction built trust while providing essential, if insufficient, hydration. The smaller elephant presented a more complex challenge. Its condition had deteriorated to the point where it showed little interest in water, even when its companion demonstrated safe drinking. Its body temperature remained dangerously elevated despite the shade, and its breathing had become rapid and shallow, signs that cellular metabolism was beginning to break down. Dr. Kamani made the critical decision to attempt IV intervention with the smaller elephant first. Its condition left no room for extended trust-building exercises. The team would need to work quickly, accurately, and with minimal restraint to avoid adding dangerous stress to an already failing system. The IV placement required 3 team members working in careful coordination. One person stabilized the elephant's head, speaking constantly in soothing tones while preventing sudden movements. The second team member located the appropriate vein in the elephant's ear, one of the few locations where IV access is possible without complete anesthesia. Dr. Kimani performed the actual insertion, her hands steady despite the knowledge that this single procedure might determine whether the young elephant survived. The initial fluid flow was adjusted to the slowest possible rate. Too much too quickly could overwhelm the elephant's compromised circulatory system. Too little would fail to reverse the dehydration before organ failure became irreversible. Dr. Kimani monitored the elephant's response minute by minute, adjusting flow rates based on heart rate, respiratory patterns, and behavioral indicators. The larger elephant's reaction to this intervention proved crucial. Rather than becoming agitated by the medical equipment and human activity around its companion, it moved closer, positioning itself where it could maintain physical contact while allowing the team to work. Its trunk would occasionally brush against the smaller elephant's back, gentle touches that seemed to provide comfort during the stressful procedure. After 2 hours of IV fluid therapy, the smaller elephant showed its first positive response. Its breathing became less labored, and it began to show interest in its surroundings. When water was offered, it managed several small drinks, the first voluntary hydration it had achieved in days. However, as the elephant's immediate dehydration began to improve, secondary complications emerged. The abrasions on their trunks, initially seeming minor compared to their life-threatening dehydration, began showing signs of serious infection. The constant digging in contaminated soil had introduced bacteria deep into tissue wounds. With their immune systems compromised by stress and dehydration, their bodies were failing to fight off these infections. The larger elephant developed a fever spike on the second day of treatment. Its temperature rose rapidly, indicating that the infection was spreading through its bloodstream. Dr. Kimani faced another critical decision. Antibiotic intervention carries its own risks in stressed elephants, but untreated sepsis would certainly prove fatal. The treatment protocol required round-the-clock monitoring. Team members worked in shifts, maintaining constant observation of both elephants' vital signs, fluid intake, and behavioral patterns. Each small improvement was documented and analyzed for signs that treatment was succeeding or failing. The smaller elephant's recovery progressed more smoothly once proper hydration was restored. Its natural resilience, combined with the absence of serious secondary infections, allowed its body systems to stabilize relatively quickly. By the third day, it was moving around the shaded area independently and showing interest in the vegetation the team provided. The larger elephant's battle was more complex. The infection required aggressive antibiotic therapy that stressed its already compromised system. For several days, the outcome remained uncertain. Its fever would spike during the day, then drop to normal levels at night, creating a pattern that suggested its body was fighting, but not yet winning the battle against the bacterial infection. The turning point came on the fifth day, when the larger elephant's fever broke permanently, and it began showing consistent interest in food and water. The infection had been controlled, and its body was beginning the slow process of rebuilding the strength lost during its ordeal. Throughout this medical crisis, the bond between the two elephants provided a stabilizing factor that Dr. Kimani recognized as crucial to their recovery. The larger elephant's protective behavior never wavered, even when its own condition was most critical. The smaller elephant, in turn, seemed to draw strength from its companion's presence, showing faster improvement when they were together than when separated for medical procedures. Recovery was measured not just in medical metrics, but in the gradual return of normal elephant behaviors. The first time the younger elephant used its trunk to explore new objects represented a milestone. The first time the older elephant showed curiosity about the rescue team's activities marked another step forward. Each day brought small victories that accumulated into genuine progress toward health. After 1 week of intensive care, both elephants had stabilized sufficiently to consider the next phase of their recovery, learning to thrive in a world that had already tested their survival abilities beyond what any elephant their age should have to endure. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. The Nakuru Elephant Sanctuary sprawled across 500 acres of protected wilderness, its boundaries marked not by fences, but by natural features that encouraged wildlife to stay while allowing them the freedom to leave. Within this haven, 2 young elephants had learned to live again. The larger elephant, now named Simba, lion in Swahili, had grown substantially during his recovery period. His shoulders had broadened, his legs had lengthened, and his trunk had developed the confident flexibility that characterized healthy elephants. More importantly, his behavior had evolved from desperate survival mode to the curious exploration typical of his age group. His companion, called Pendo, Love, for her gentle, affectionate nature, had undergone an even more dramatic transformation. The fragile, barely alive infant who had collapsed beside that roadside excavation had developed into a playful, energetic young elephant whose joy in simple activities reminded observers why elephant conservation was worth every effort invested. But their education was far from complete. Survival in the wild required skills that instinct alone could not provide. The sanctuary's rehabilitation program focused on teaching orphaned elephants the complex knowledge typically passed down through generations of matriarchal guidance. Water location represented the most critical of these skills. In the wild elephant herds, follow routes established over centuries, moving between water sources according to seasonal patterns that ensure survival during droughts. Individual elephants learn these routes by following their mothers and aunts, absorbing geographic knowledge that spans hundreds of square miles. Simba and Pendo had missed this crucial learning period. Their desperate roadside digging had demonstrated their understanding that water could be found underground, but they lacked the practical knowledge necessary to identify promising locations. The sanctuary's training program was designed to fill this gap. The lesson began at dawn when the temperature was cool and the elephants were most alert. Dr. Kimani had designed a training area that mimicked natural conditions while providing controlled learning opportunities. Several sites around the sanctuary contained buried water sources at varying depths, some accessible through digging, others requiring different strategies. Simba and Pendo were introduced to this area alongside 2 older elephants who had completed similar training. The older elephants served as teachers, demonstrating through their behavior the subtle signs that indicated water availability. They would approach potential digging sites with careful deliberation, using their trunks to test soil composition, moisture content, and scent markers that might indicate underground water. The first lesson involved soil analysis. Experienced elephants can distinguish between dozens of soil types, each indicating different possibilities for water discovery. Sandy soils with certain mineral content suggest underground streams. Clay compositions with specific drainage patterns indicate areas where rainwater naturally accumulates. Rocky ground with particular vegetation coverage might hide springs that flow only during certain seasons. Simba, proved to be a quick student. His traumatic experience had heightened his attention to anything related to water discovery. When the older elephants paused at a specific location, Simba would immediately position himself nearby, observing their trunk movements and body language with intense focus. He began copying their techniques within hours of the first demonstration. Pendo's learning style was more exploratory. Rather than copying specific behaviors, she would investigate the same areas, independently developing her own methods for testing soil and moisture. Her approach was less systematic, but often led to creative solutions that even the older elephants found interesting. The first successful dig came after 3 days of training. Simba had identified a location where soil moisture levels were slightly higher than the surrounding area. His digging technique had improved dramatically. Instead of the desperate, inefficient excavation witnessed months earlier, he now worked systematically, removing soil in organized patterns that prevented cave-ins while maximizing access to the target area. When his trunk finally touched water at 18 inches depth, the response was electric. Not only had he succeeded in finding water, but he had done so using knowledge rather than desperation. The confidence this success brought transformed his entire demeanor. For the first time since his rescue, Simba began to behave like a young elephant who believed in his own survival abilities. Pendo's approach was characteristically different. Rather than competing with Simba's success, she focused on learning from it. She examined the soil he had excavated, testing its composition with her trunk. She observed the angle of his excavation and the depth at which water appeared. Most importantly, she paid attention to the environmental conditions that had indicated water availability at that location. Her first successful dig came 2 weeks later. The site she chose was more challenging. Water was deeper and the soil was more difficult to excavate. But her systematic approach, learned through careful observation of both Django and the older elephants, allowed her to work efficiently toward her goal. When water finally appeared, her quiet satisfaction spoke to a confidence that would serve her well in future survival situations. The training program expanded beyond simple water location. Elephants require knowledge about seasonal water patterns, backup water sources, and emergency techniques for surviving extended droughts. The sanctuary provided opportunities to learn all these skills in controlled conditions. Seasonal training involved introducing the elephants to sites that contained water only during certain months. They learned to recognize the signs that indicated seasonal availability and to remember locations for future use. This type of knowledge required patience and repetition, skills that would prove essential if they ever returned to wild environments. Emergency techniques proved equally important. During severe droughts, elephants sometimes survive by digging in dry riverbeds where underground water may persist long after surface water disappears. They learn to read landscape features that suggest underground water flow and to excavate efficiently in challenging conditions. Simba and Pendo practiced these techniques repeatedly until they became automatic responses. Their playful practice sessions around the sanctuary began to resemble the confident, water-seeking behavior of wild elephants. Observers noted that they had developed their own communication patterns for sharing information about water sources, trunk touches, and body positioning that allowed them to coordinate their searches effectively. The most significant development was their relationship with other elephants at the sanctuary. Initially, they had bonded only with each other, their shared trauma creating an exclusive partnership. As their confidence grew, they began integrating with the larger elephant community, learning social behaviors that would prove essential in any future herd situation. Other young elephants at the sanctuary began copying their digging techniques. Simba and Pendo had become teachers themselves, passing on the skills they had learned to newer arrivals. This development, 2 years had passed since that misty morning when 2 desperate young elephants had been found digging for their lives beside a rural road. The anniversary brought Dr. Kimani back to the same stretch of asphalt, now transformed into an educational site where visitors could learn about elephant behavior conservation challenges and the delicate balance between human development and wildlife survival. Standing where Simba and Pendo had once excavated their futile hole, she reflected on the profound lessons their rescue had taught not just the elephants, but everyone involved in their rehabilitation. The experience had fundamentally changed how the sanctuary approached elephant conservation, influencing policies that now guided wildlife management across East Africa. The educational impact began with understanding what had led to their crisis. Research conducted after their rescue revealed the complex chain of events that had separated them from their herd. A prolonged drought had forced elephant families to travel unprecedented distances in search of water. Human settlements expanding into traditional migration corridors had created barriers that confused the elephants' navigation patterns. The two young elephants had become separated during a panicked response to vehicle traffic at a critical water crossing. Their story illuminated the invisible pressures facing elephant populations throughout Africa. Climate change was creating longer, more severe droughts that pushed elephant survival skills beyond traditional limits. Urban expansion was fragmenting the ancient pathways that elephants had followed for generations, creating gaps in knowledge transfer that left young elephants vulnerable to exactly the kind of crisis Simba and Pendo had experienced. Dr. Kamani had documented every aspect of their rehabilitation, creating a comprehensive study that revealed how trauma and survival instincts interacted in young elephant psychology. The data showed that elephants who experienced severe dehydration developed heightened awareness of water-related environmental cues, but also demonstrated anxiety responses that could persist for years after their physical recovery. The educational program, built around their story, addressed multiple audiences with different but interconnected messages. For local communities, the focus was on understanding elephant behavior during drought conditions and developing response protocols that could prevent similar separations. Farmers learned to recognize signs of elephant distress and to contact wildlife authorities rather than attempting to drive elephants away from agricultural areas. School children who visited the sanctuary received age-appropriate lessons about animal adaptation, survival strategies, and the importance of habitat conservation. Simba and Pendo, now confident and healthy, served as living ambassadors for their species. Their comfortable interaction with humans allowed close observation of elephant intelligence, social behavior, and problem-solving abilities that most people never had the opportunity to witness. The scientific community gained valuable insights into elephant cognition and learning capacity. Simba and Pendo's rehabilitation had demonstrated that young elephants could acquire survival skills through structured training programs even when separated from their natural family groups. This discovery influenced conservation strategies for orphaned elephants across Africa, proving that rehabilitation was possible even in severe cases of trauma and abandonment. Perhaps most importantly, their story challenged common assumptions about animal intelligence and emotional capacity. The bond between Simba and Pendo, which had sustained them through their crisis and continued to anchor their recovery, provided compelling evidence of elephant emotional complexity. Their ability to learn, adapt, and teach other elephants demonstrated cognitive abilities that demanded respect and informed conservation approaches. The water-finding skills they had mastered became the foundation for an innovative education program. Visitors could observe their systematic approach to locating underground water sources, learning to recognize the environmental indicators that elephants use to identify promising excavation sites. This knowledge proved valuable not only for understanding elephant behavior, but for communities facing water scarcity challenges themselves. Traditional ecological knowledge combined with elephant expertise offered solutions to human water security problems. The sanctuary developed partnerships with rural communities, teaching water location techniques that elephants had perfected over millions of years of evolution. These programs created positive associations between elephant presence and human benefit, building support for conservation initiatives. The broader implications extended to policy discussions about land use, wildlife corridors, and climate adaptation strategies. Simba and Pendo's rescue had cost thousands of dollars and required intensive veterinary intervention that highlighted the economic consequences of habitat fragmentation. Prevention through corridor preservation and community education proved far more cost-effective than emergency wildlife rescue operations. Their rehabilitation also demonstrated the interconnectedness of human and wildlife welfare. The same drought conditions that had threatened the elephants had created water scarcity problems for rural communities. The same land use conflicts that had disrupted elephant migration patterns were creating tension between conservation goals and agricultural development. Solutions required integrated approaches that addressed both human and wildlife needs simultaneously. The sanctuary's educational programs evolved to address these complex relationships. Visitors learned about sustainable agriculture practices that accommodated wildlife movement, water conservation techniques that benefited both humans and animals, and economic development strategies that created incentives for conservation rather than habitat destruction. International visitors carried these lessons back to their home countries, where elephant conservation might seem like a distant concern. They learned how consumer choices, particularly regarding agricultural products and manufactured goods, could influence land use decisions in elephant habitat regions. The global marketplace connected seemingly unrelated purchasing decisions to the survival prospects of individual elephants like Simba and Pendo. The story also highlighted the critical importance of rapid response capabilities in wildlife conservation. The hours between discovery and professional intervention had made the difference between successful rehabilitation and certain death. This realization led to the development of community-based wildlife response networks, training local residents to recognize emergency situations and coordinate with professional rescue teams. Technology played an increasingly important role in these efforts. Mobile communication networks allowed rapid reporting of wildlife emergencies. GPS tracking systems helped identify optimal locations for water sources during drought conditions. Social media platforms enabled real-time coordination of rescue efforts and public education about conservation challenges. As Dr. Kamani watched a new group of school children observe Simba and Pendo's demonstration of water location techniques, she recognized that their educational impact would extend far beyond their individual story. These children would grow up understanding elephant intelligence and behavior in ways that previous generations never could. Their informed perspectives would influence future policy decisions, conservation investments, and community attitudes toward wildlife. The elephants themselves seemed to understand their educational role. Simba had developed a particular talent for engaging with visitors, demonstrating his digging techniques with deliberate precision that suggested awareness of his audience. Pendo's gentle interactions with nervous children had made her an ideal ambassador for building positive associations with elephant encounters. Their continued bond provided ongoing lessons about elephant social behavior. Researchers documented their communication patterns, cooperative problem-solving strategies, and mutual support behaviors that offered insights into elephant family dynamics. These observations informed captive elephant management practices and wild elephant conservation strategies. The sustainability of their educational impact depended on continued support for the sanctuary's programs and the broader conservation initiatives they represented. Funding challenges remained constant, requiring creative approaches to demonstrate the economic value of conservation education. The sanctuary developed partnerships with educational institutions, tourism operators, and international conservation organizations to ensure long-term viability. As the sun set over the sanctuary, casting long shadows across the acacia trees where Simba and Pendo now peacefully foraged, Dr. Kamani reflected on the ripple effects of their rescue. What had begun as an emergency response to two dying elephants had evolved into a comprehensive educational program that influenced conservation thinking across multiple continents. Their story would continue to teach future generations about resilience adaptation and the profound connections between human choices and wildlife survival. In learning to thrive again after their desperate crisis, Simba and Pendo had become teachers, ambassadors, and symbols of hope for elephant conservation worldwide. The wisdom of water they had gained through their ordeal, the knowledge of where to dig, how to persist, and why survival required both individual determination and community support, had become a metaphor for conservation itself. Like water in the drought-stricken landscape, conservation success required knowing where to focus efforts, how to persist through setbacks, and why collaboration between humans and wildlife offered the best hope for long-term survival. Their daily demonstration of these principles continued to inspire everyone who witnessed it, transforming a tragic beginning into an ongoing story of education, hope, and the enduring bond between two elephants who had learned that survival was not just about finding water, it was about never giving up the search for life itself.